American President Donald Trump is preparing to announce a great victory in the war with Iran. Donald Trump's administration is preparing to completely end the military operation against Iran, without achieving a broader nuclear agreement. Instead, the White House has focused on a single goal: the guaranteed full opening of the Hormuz Strait. It is precisely the opening of the Hormuz Strait, which was already open before the war began, that Trump wants to present as a major victory. Counting on the fact that after the strait is opened, gasoline prices in the United States will drop just in time for the midterm elections. And Americans will fall for this nonsense about a victory over Iran. The Wall Street Journal writes about this today, citing American officials. But today, August 9th, Iran took a step that turns Donald Trump's entire victory narrative upside down. Tehran announced that it will not start negotiations with the US at all, accusing Washington of violating the agreement signed back in June. At the same time, the Houthis in Yemen expanded the conflict to another front by striking a major Saudi oil refinery, effectively escalating the civil war in that country. And it is already obvious that without directions from Tehran, the Yemeni Houthis would not have gone for this escalation. And at the same time, Iran issued a truly humiliating ultimatum to Donald Trump, realizing that he is still seeking to end the war. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic and the latest updates together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. We are moving towards the mark of 300,000 subscribers, so I will be grateful for each of your subscriptions. So today, August 9th, apparently sensing weakness from the White House, Iran declares that it will not start negotiations with the US because, according to its account, Washington violated the agreement signed in June. This is a noticeable hardening of their position compared to even yesterday, when Tehran was only saying that it was conducting dialogue exclusively with Oman on technical issues of navigation and sometimes passing messages to the US through intermediaries. At the same time, the Yemeni Houthi movement, allied with Iran, announced that it was expanding the conflict on two fronts: an attack on forces loyal to Saudi Arabia in Yemen, and a separate strike on a major Saudi oil refinery on the Red Sea coast. That is, at the very moment when official Tehran is talking about negotiations with Oman about opening the Hormuz Strait. Its regional ally opens a new front against a key Saudi energy facility and once again escalates the civil war in Yemen. But to understand how we got to this point in the crisis, let's go back to what the Wall Street Journal wrote about the White House's change in strategy. According to American officials, after reports from the US military, the Trump administration adjusted its main objective in this war. Instead of seeking a broader nuclear agreement with Iran, it focused on restoring commercial shipping through the Hormuz Strait. This shift came after closed discussions during which Donald Trump told his advisors that an official nuclear agreement was no longer a mandatory condition for ending hostilities. Well, basically all the war goals that were announced at the beginning are no longer mandatory, and the new goal of this war is simply to open the Hormuz Strait, which, let me remind you, was actually open even before the war. And I also remind you that the original goals of this war, according to Donald Trump himself, were the capitulation of the Iranian regime, possibly even regime change, and then a complete abandonment of the nuclear program and an agreement on this nuclear program. Plus, Trump said, we will take all the enriched uranium from these Iranians. Then, the elimination of the missile program and the drone program. The elimination of all Iranian proxy forces throughout the entire region. And then, the goal of opening the Hormuz Strait appeared, which was already open anyway. In general, now it all comes down to, God willing at least, please, open the Hormuz Strait for us, and the Americans will consider that they have won this war. According to White House officials, the U.S. strikes destroyed 3 main nuclear program facilities, depriving Tehran of the ability to immediately continue uranium enrichment. And the remaining nuclear materials deep underground have allegedly become completely inaccessible to the Iranians, so, well, why keep fighting? Washington assumes that the capabilities of American intelligence to monitor the situation, as well as the ongoing threat of military intervention, will be sufficient as a long-term deterrent against Iran's attempts to restore its nuclear infrastructure. And here's an interesting point. Right now, the Trump administration is citing claims that supposedly even back in 2025, let me remind you, in June during the 12-day war, U.S. airstrikes completely destroyed the 3 main nuclear facilities in Iran. And supposedly after that, of course, there are entrances to these facilities, and American intelligence closely monitors these entrances. And as soon as they see that the Iranians are trying to get enriched uranium out of there, they can immediately launch another strike on that location. Wait, then hold on, why did we need to return to war this year? If we've come back to the point where these nuclear facilities are supposedly destroyed, why did we return to war on February 28th? So, Trump, who promised to sign a nuclear agreement better than the one signed by Barack Obama, and remember, at the beginning of the war, he said, Barack Obama signed such a terrible nuclear agreement, I'll sign one that's much better, it'll be super, super cool. It will be permanent. It will last for centuries, and no generation of Americans will ever have to return to this issue again. In the end, Trump completely gave up on the idea of this agreement, saying, listen, to hell with this nuclear agreement, let's just like before the war open the Hormuz Strait. Let's bring back normal gas prices in the United States of America, hold the elections, and just forget about Iran. Well, it didn't work out, but we'll declare it a victory anyway. But still, no matter how much Trump boasts, Iran senses this weakness. The Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, Mohammad Bakr Zolgadar, stated that the U.S. must lift the naval blockade and withdraw all its troops from the region around Iran, pay war reparations and indemnities, unfreeze Iranian assets, as well as stop attacks on Iran's allies in the region and threats against Tehran. And the U.S. must do all this before shipping can resume. Tehran also demanded that American warships be barred from passing through this waterway and to introduce a fee for the transit of commercial vessels. This is a condition that Washington categorically rejected. Zalgadar's wording was extremely tough, and he stated the following: until America changes its behavior, the Hormuz Strait will not be opened. He emphasized that this was supposedly the demand of the awakened people of Iran and that the Supreme National Security Council, quote, would never back down either in war or in negotiations. And this list of demands from Zalgadar actually overturned expectations that the deal with Oman would soon allow trade through the Hormuz Strait to resume and lower global energy prices. Let me remind you once again, just a little over a week ago, Donald Trump, actually more than a week ago, yes, it's already been more than a week, Donald Trump publicly stated that he had cancelled some kind of huge attack on Iran, and he claimed that the deal would be signed the next day and the Hormuz Strait would be fully opened. Well, a few weeks earlier, he actually said that the Hormuz Strait was already open. And I had a question. Then what is the deal for? But nevertheless, more than a week has passed and there is no sign of any deal at all. This puts direct pressure on Donald Trump, forcing him to consider the terms. Donald, if he wants to lower consumer prices for Americans themselves, which is critically important for Republicans ahead of the midterm elections in November. The chronology of the last few days is also telling, which explains why Iran's current refusal to negotiate is part of a recurring pattern. Back on August 2nd, Trump stated that he had cancelled what he himself called the largest planned U.S. military operation since World War II. After Saudi Arabia, the Emirates and Iran itself, according to him, insisted on diplomacy. And just the other day he said again, listen, they were begging me. They were literally crawling on their knees and saying, please, Donald Trump, don't hit us. You know, it's very convenient to claim that I was planning the most powerful attack since World War II, but I cancelled it. Well, because no one can really check what you are planning in your head, whether you are actually planning the most powerful attack since World War II or not. Or just imagined it yourself. So any scenarios about what supposedly could have happened are really the perfect setup for all kinds of manipulation. So now you can say, yeah, we were actually planning, I don't know, to strike with nuclear weapons to completely wipe Iran off the map, but they begged us not to do it, and in the end, I didn't do it. Well, who knows if he really planned that or not. So, in the end, the US and Israel then suspended new strikes on Iran in order to make a deal to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. That was on August 2nd. On August 5th, Trump said that he was personally involved in the negotiations. Next, I'll quote him. I think everything is going very well. I'm involved in the negotiations. I think things are going fine. Maybe it will happen soon. On August 7th, Trump said, and I quote, they want to make a deal. Look, it's obvious. They don't want to get hit, you know? They want to come to an agreement, so we'll see. Well, today is August 9th. The Iranians say, first of all, we haven't been negotiating in recent days, and we don't want to negotiate with the Americans. And on the same day, the director of the National Economic Council of the White House, Kevin Hassett, admitted that gas prices in the US are a bit high. Quote, but we can say that it's much less than people expected. The average price of gasoline in the country is $4.04 per gallon, although it is decreasing. You see, that's the justification. This again reminds me of Russian propaganda, where they had, remember, negative growth. So American officials are saying, listen, yes, the price of gasoline really has increased. But it hasn't increased as much as some people expected. Some might have even expected it to be $5 per gallon, but it's not $5. It's only $4.04, not $5 as some expected. But on the same day, US Vice President J.D. Vance gave a much less optimistic assessment of exactly the same negotiations. He said that the negotiation process with Iran would be messy and would take time, calling the Iranians extremely difficult people with a fragmented system. That is, literally within a week, Washington's rhetoric swung from, the deal will be made as soon as tomorrow, things are going great, to today's situation where Iran refuses to even sit at the negotiating table and the US plans to simply withdraw from the war without any kind of victory. Well, and the Iranians are completely convinced that Trump wants to get out of the conflict and is focused on opening the strait. That's why they're playing a very tough game. That is, Trump himself once said a great phrase. At one point, Trump once said an incredibly great line, and I really like it. He said that as soon as you show your opponent or adversary that you're interested in making a deal, an agreement, and so on, you've already lost. That's it. As soon as the other side realizes that you are vitally interested in this, they will manipulate, play hardball, set tough demands, and so on. Now, Trump himself has found himself in this situation with Iran. But Donald Trump also faced problems within Washington itself. A day earlier, the US Senate approved temporary funding, but the government did not support Trump's demand to allocate about $70 billion for military spending on combat operations against Iran. At the same time, Trump had a conflict with Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth because amid the war with Iran, the US faced a shortage of missiles. The president demanded an explanation. Why he was not informed about this in advance. Although, according to American media, the generals had said even before the war that they needed to be very careful about going to war, because if we go too far, there really won't be enough missiles. But publicly, Trump stated that he had no conflict with Hegseth, and that America has more than enough ammunition. He says, we have so many reserves that there's simply nowhere to store them. But in reality, the United States can't give Patriots to Ukraine because there's a shortage. But the main thing here is not to get confused. As you understand, these are two different realities in the mind of Donald Trump. Well, and this brings us to the most troubling part. The United States has indeed faced a reduction in reserves of many important types of weapons. which could affect their readiness for a potential conflict with Russia or China. The New York Times is already writing about this. And according to the publication, Russian and Chinese military are closely monitoring the rate at which the US is spending ammunition in this war. And in Washington, there are concerns that Moscow and Beijing may take this information into account when planning their own military actions. The Pentagon has expended significant amounts of missiles and air defense assets, the stocks of which are difficult to replenish quickly, and restoring the arsenals may take a significant amount of time, even with increased funding. At the same time, American officials officially insist that the United States of America maintains the necessary military capabilities, but the situation with the stockpiles is already forcing the Pentagon to urgently accelerate production. And today it became known that the White House gave defense companies 21 days to sharply increase ammunition production. And here, two facts don't quite add up, if we still believe Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump insists that, well, there is no ammunition shortage, that the warehouses are overflowing, and in general this weapon is lying around all over the world. Just like that, and it's in your hands. If that's the case, then why demand that arms companies sharply increase ammunition production? Something doesn't add up here. In conclusion, if you believe the Wall Street Journal, the Donald Trump administration has effectively written off the original goal of this war, full nuclear disarmament of Iran, and focused only on opening the Hormuz Strait, which was already open before the war. Well, even this reduced goal is slipping away because in just a week, Washington's tone has shifted from "the deal is almost ready" to today's direct refusal by Tehran to negotiate under the pretext of violating the June agreement. But we understand that Tehran simply senses weakness. At the same time, the conflict is spreading across the Middle East. The Houthis struck a Saudi oil refinery today, opening a new front and creating a new flashpoint, precisely at the moment when the diplomatic track, if we were to believe Trump's words, should have been nearing a resolution. And in the background, Congress is also cutting funding for the prolonged war. President Trump is in conflict with his own Secretary of Defense because of a missile shortage. And this depletion is already being monitored in Moscow and Beijing. That is, potential adversaries in much larger conflicts who are just watching for now. In general, we'll see how the outcome of this war develops, but it's already obvious that Trump will do everything he can to lower expectations and in every possible way downplay his own initial goals of this war. In general, I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so financially with any donation using the links and details in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.